Yeah, it's working. Yes. And I'm here on my iPhone. I've got this and I've got the live chat. I'm gonna type something in so that you can all see it. Please type in if you are actually here. I know this is probably going to be just an hour of me talking alone. I will have to try cutting out the beginning of it. Honestly, this has been kind of happening on a whim because I just wanted to make this stream. I've been planning it for quite some time, actually. I wanted originally to start making real videos, but ultimately I decided against it for several reasons. For one, it's very time intensive to do so, which is very, very difficult to maintain while I'm studying medicine and later working as a doctor. And second, I just don't think that it's particularly my style. I just enjoy having a discussion with people. In the future, I would love to have some of you. He said during a stream with 0 live listeners besides him on his iPhone. But I would love to have people on as guests. I would love to have just maybe a reaction video to some videos that already exist. Everything is free use, of course. Everything is legal. And my point in all of this is basically that I just like the spontaneity. I have had a very stressful week, and therefore I feel very relieved to have started this. I've basically prepared most of it in the last 1.5 hours. So I really hope that something will come out of it. And I know this has been a pretty long or even short introduction, depending on what you wanted to hear from an introduction. You certainly didn't want to know much about how I've been setting up OBS and creating PNGs for the thumbnails before ultimately losing my good thumbnail and having to resort to one that was hastily put together in 5 seconds, basically. My name is Mark. I'm 24 years old, always trying to remember my real age. When I was 21, I was still thinking I was 18. Now that I'm 24, I'm still regularly thinking that I'm 21. So it's basically evening out. I'm slowly but surely getting the hang out of my real age. And I'm studying medicine in Berlin, Germany. I've been interested in technology since I can remember, particularly Apple stuff. I've been using an iPhone since the 3GS, somewhere around the mid-year, so since either the end of 2009 or the beginning of 2010. That was also the year that I've bought the iPad, the first one. Then it's been basically downhill. The iMac 2012 edition was bought in early 2013. Meanwhile, I've bought the iPhone 4S. I've bought the iPad 2. All of that was later followed up by an iPad Air, an iPhone 5, an iPhone 6, 6S, 7. And then ultimately I'm now at an iPhone XS Max, and I'm planning to upgrade later this year as Apple releases something that will fully satisfy my needs, as I really want. What did I want actually from the new iPhone besides promotion? I kind of really want some interesting changes to the display besides promotion. I really would love micro LED. I know it's not going to happen, but it's still a nice thought. But overall, I'm just so happy with the iPhone 12 series that just promotion and a slightly better camera is all I'm gonna need. And since I'm going for the Max version, I don't have to compromise in anything that has to do. Oh, I have a subscriber and a like for the video. Gonna look at the live chat. Oh, Zboito, yeah, welcome, man. I'm so happy to have you here. And type something in if you want something particular to hear or how long you can stay. I believe you said that you can't stay long for a while. I actually thought that most of the guys that I communicate with are in America. I don't know why. And as it turned out, yeah, better battery for the iPhone. Well, it's not that much of a complaint for me on the iPhone Max, but I can really get why people who want a mini want much better battery life, and for people who want the regular one want at least slightly better battery life, especially if they get promotion. Like, then you really have to double down on the battery, and then once you go to 60 hertz, whenever your battery is low, you essentially have enormous battery life. I know now 3 or 4 people who have turned off 120 hertz in their Samsungs, which is funny because they all say that they essentially get they get like this. Oh my god, more people are joining in. Hello, Ibrahim. What I was going to say is that the Mini really needs to be thicker, and it needs to have substantially better battery life. And even for those people who really want promotion on the Pros, I think a solid option to go with 60 is really welcome, because from what I've heard from my Samsung friends is that a lot of them have just turned it off for battery reasons and to reduce the soap opera effect. So I have used a couple 120 hertz phones, but yeah, I wasn't necessarily in love with it. I only start feeling the effect of like high refresh rate on something like an iPad or even bigger. For some, I would love a 120 hertz Mac. That would be killer. And I'm getting a 120 hertz TV for my PlayStation 5 a little later this year. But yeah, that's basically a rant in the beginning. Everybody who's turning in knows who I am, so I'm just gonna do as little introduction as possible to get to the main stuff. Is that okay for the guys in the chat? $100 price reduction would be awesome, yes. And I think it's a little bit in play once you consider that Apple might just introduce 128 gigabytes as the base version for the normal devices instead of 64, and maybe they will get rid of the $30 they've stacked on top because of 5G, so you basically get a 128 gigabyte version for $80 cheaper. This all depends on how the 12 series is going to do by the end of the year. The iPad Pro definitely has 120 hertz touch sampling because it has had that for years because of the Apple Pencil. Even my iPad from 2015, it doesn't work for a normal touch on my old iPad, but it does on the newer ones, and it needs that for the low latency that Apple has introduced. Are you fine with starting out with Intel as the first topic? Because we have had quite a few attack ads coming out from Justin Long, or Lang. I'm always forgetting how he is called because he hasn't been in anything recently. Zubaito, you're right. Basically, almost every Apple product, especially the iPads, have had it even longer than iPhones, but the iPhones have had it also for quite a while. So I think we're going to start with Intel, because as you can also see in my thumbnail, it's a little funny that way, because in the thumbnail it's basically like a cheap PNG of like the Apple M1 logo versus the logo of an Intel processor, because I'm gonna look at Intel attack ad. We're gonna need like we're gonna watch the video, but I think to have that as like exactly like that's the one. Yeah, it's Justin Long. So as you all can all remember, that's the guy from the Mac versus PC or Mac and PC ads from long before, and the PC guy is still doing some kind of ads for Apple. Like he's been in the recent M1 keynote at the very end, so that's been very, very funny to see. I really hope that Apple will also that's the point. That's the point I'm trying to make here. And I think this article is so good because it just flat out calls this move desperate. We don't need Apple to make attack ads anymore. That's my main point. Apple was doing the Mac versus PC ads when Apple was not in the gutter. They've been on the rise at that point, but they were basically a blip in comparison to Microsoft and Windows. And what's so funny about it is because Intel essentially, and you can all watch, small plug, not for myself, but for Rene Ritchie, who's made an amazing analysis of the Intel attack video, because I think it's just so stupid because yes, they've lost essentially the business of 5 to 6, maybe later up to 7 or 8 million Macs per quarter, and Macs have historically had some very expensive processors inside them, even in terms of the dual core that Apple has been using with the MacBook Air. That those were expensive dual cores in comparison to basically like cheap Pentiums that you could still buy, and it wouldn't have even made a big difference because the MacBook Air was so thermally constrained for Intel's ancient architecture. It's just funny to see it. And Intel has essentially come out and said, yeah, we are the underdogs now. We need the additional market share and we need to start comparing ourselves to other products. Yeah, it would be cool for everybody who's watching this later who doesn't have access to the live chat. I'm also reacting to the live chat. I think it's the best format, but I will try to do as little hard stops as possible. So whenever I make an or just feel free to write in the chat whenever it gets too much, because that's what I tend to do when I'm reacting to something. It would be funny for Apple to do some attack ads themselves, but ultimately Apple doesn't need to. The M1 is selling themselves. Intel is kind of a joke by itself in comparison to AMD in the Windows space, and it just isn't necessary. And the Justin Long thing is also, it's very Intel-like, but it's also very cheap marketing, because Justin Long has been basically doing that as long as we know, because he's also, that's the only thing he can do to stay in any kind of limelight right now. This is a German article, but essentially what it says is that he is, I don't know why German is turned on in my PC. Well, I'm a German speaker. I have never turned on German in any of my tag. Yeah, he has been doing those ads for Huawei 3 years ago. So this is kind of reminiscing about the Mac versus PC ads. And here he is essentially like praising, I believe it was a Huawei Mate 10. It's kind of a confusing naming scheme once you have 1,000 devices inside it. The main point I'm trying to make here is Intel is a very strong company. They have almost unlimited financial resources. They have a very strong standing in multiple industries, and they are trying to grow with their GPU business right now. They're gonna launch, maybe by the end of the year, competitors to AMD and NVIDIA GPUs. They already have a very strong server business that isn't even going away, even if AMD is twice as good at half the power consumption. The server industry completely relies on reliability and compatibility with existing programs, and this is where Intel still smokes AMD, especially if you combine it like with an NVIDIA GPU. Then compatibility to basically almost anything is nigh perfect in comparison to AMD. Sorry guys, I'm a little tired. As I've said, I'm doing this a little bit on a self-dare to finally start it out. I promise you the next one is gonna get better. Feel free to type in the chat for how long you would like for such a stream to last. Like I've seen a few streams like that lasting for 2 hours, for 3 hours. I don't think that I would do much longer than 2, but probably a little bit over 1 hour. Unless it's a very lazy week, and if I decide to do maybe a stream like once every 2 days, then it's probably going to be between half an hour and 1 hour. If it's going to be every 4 days, then it's probably going to be an hour. If it's just once a week, then it's probably going to be a 1.5 hour stream or something like that. So we have 3 people watching now. I believe it's me being one of them. Okay, so I will try to react to you guys so that you feel a little vindicated. It's my first stream, and I basically am grateful to anybody tuning in. You heard that the new GPU will be less powerful than 3070 or the same as the 6700 XT competitor. It's kind of difficult to say because from everything that we've heard, it's probably around a 2080 Ti. It's gonna have 4096 stream processors, which if you know, Raja Koduri is now the new GPU guy at Intel. And he's been at AMD before, and he's been doing 4096 stream processors, basically everything he can. Vega 64 has had 4096 stream processors. Fermi has had 4096 stream processors. And I'm actually not sure about the Radeon 7. I believe the Radeon 7 has had a little less. So the point is, it's going to match a 2080 Ti, which is going to be around the 3070. Probably a little faster. It depends on the latency issues. They apparently have had some stability problems with it, and if they don't nail it, then it's basically a 10 to 15% penalty at least. For this kind of architecture that they're going for. But ultimately, I think it's going to be quite competitive with like a 3070, especially since Intel can kind of drop the price a little bit. The 6700 XT is already a little slower than the 3070. So if Intel comes in at 450, beats them out in some games, loses in others, it's kind of a good deal. Especially their high-end version might beat the 3070, but then I think given Intel's history, it's also going to be expensive and have 16 gigabytes of RAM as kind of as an advertisement point. But it's definitely going to be slower in my eyes than the 6800. Okay, yeah, so given that, now that we've kind of a little bit destroyed Intel's recent standing, as we have acknowledged some strengths that they're going to do, but they're not going to be the leader in the GPU market when they're going to launch, while they are the overall leader in the CPU market, because you have to count laptops, they're kind of a complete loser in comparison to the overall market if you count tablets, smartphones. That's kind of a little bit the sad point with Intel, because we kind of evaluate them as a PC company, and Apple is so much more than that. And I think that fundamentally that's what they're most afraid of. Apple can grow in an almost unlimited way because they can expand their appeal. Intel cannot. Intel greatly depends on the strength of the PC market. And it's kind of a company that has gotten so much wrong historically. They have tried launching GPUs previously. They have tried making highly efficient smartphone processors or even tablet processors, and they've failed and failed. Like, you cannot put an Intel chip like in something smaller than 10 inches. You're losing so much of the performance that you're basically better off with something cheaper and more efficient that will give you longer battery life and will be compatible with mobile apps. Because on everything that is smaller than 10 inches, you aren't gonna need Windows anyway. And you're also not going to need Mac OS, to be fair, or Chrome OS or anything else. Quite honestly, if you want something smaller, I just recommend getting an iPad. Intel is not anymore just a CPU company. They have the strength of an established market, which, let's be honest, is kind of also Apple's shtick. Like, anybody who has bought thermally constrained dual core MacBook Air for $1,000 has also gotten a little bit the short end of the stick, because Apple has just introduced the M1 like 4 months ago, granted, but it's so much better. It came out half a year later. It doesn't thermal throttle. It has longer battery life. It has better camera, microphones, and speakers, all thanks to the M1, and it's like 4 times faster. So it's not even a joke. Intel will always be strong. I think as much as we hate them, like the PC community hates them because AMD is better, the Apple community hates them because Apple has ditched them. Like, let's be honest, they're still gonna be around. And doing this, doing this kind of attention grabbing ads, like, I recommend you watching them. I'm not going to turn on videos here because I think that's going to a little bit mess up my stream because my Mac is not the most powerful anymore. It's like, they've shown some pretty devices here, like some convertibles. Like here he is praising like face identification, which I think is weird because like Windows Hello is just a login feature. Like hello, like at least you can use Touch ID for multiple stuff, for more stuff. And then there's the Apple Watch unlock, but ads are never fully honest. And then we have like those gorgeous bezels on all those devices, because yes, Windows bezels have shrunk in recent times. They still don't look like that. And as we have seen, like I believe this was a The Verge article, which was it's also confusing here. I believe they've had an article about Mac looking better in Intel ads than they do in Apple marketing in general. Look at Apple. Yeah, that's the one. Intel's version of a MacBook Pro looks even better than a real one, because Intel gave them the same fake limitless bezels that they've also given the Windows devices. So that's been quite funny to see. Essentially what I'm trying to say here is it's a non-issue. Let's be honest. Amazon has been making attack ads about how much cheaper their tablets are. Other companies have been making all kinds of attack ads over the years. But I think we are at a point when Apple's strength in every market is completely unchallenged, because while others are trying to like have a niche for them or even grow or even become bigger than Apple, there's no Apple killer. There's nobody that will come in the smartphone market and have Apple's market share. Nobody will come into the tablet market and do that to the iPad. And even with the AirPods, where we will have a plethora of cheap devices coming in that will try to compete with AirPods, they are not gonna replace them as the market leader. I'm using my 8-year-old 2012 iMac. It's 27 inches. It has a quad-core CPU, a GTX 680MX with 2 GB of VRAM and 16 GB of you're right, Suboido, it's an iMac, and 16 GB of RAM, but it's slow RAM. It's 1600 megahertz RAM. I'm still waiting to upgrade because, as I've said, I've been mostly buying iOS devices in the meantime. Like my iPad is newer than my iMac, but it's kind of hard to run stuff like OBS on the iPad, if not impossible. Plus, I'm using a Blue Yeti mic, and I have some other peripherals always attached. It would be kind of a pain. So now we've hit, how long have we been streaming? We've now been streaming for 25 minutes. And we're gonna take now a look at our next topic, which is the March to and Apple event of April, probably, or not, who knows. Those are kind of like the John Prosser promises right now. So if you know, yeah, I'm very much interested in a new iMac, but I would probably go for a new MacBook before I go for a new iMac, because I would like to replace my iPad and my iMac in just one move. That's kind of my dream. So I would probably go for a 14-inch MacBook Pro, especially since it doesn't have the limitations of the iPad, but it now gets support for most of the iPad apps. And honestly, I don't care whether it has touch support or anything else. Like, I just like my laptops to be laptops. If it was a convertible, it would be great, but it would also be $500 more expensive. We know Apple. Yeah, full mobility would be great. So let's start with John Prosser, who's now going to be eyebrowless in 2 days. As you know, a lot of leakers, John Prosser, Kang, and others, I believe Love to Dream as well, have been throwing out rumors about the 23rd of March event. For an introduction of the iPad Pro 2021 and the all glorious AirTags. Let me show on screen what we know or don't know about AirTags. Mac Rumors always has great summaries of rumors, which honestly I don't need. But it's nice to have some visual stuff. Exactly, this was the John Prosser promise of shaving off his eyebrows if the Apple event doesn't happen on the 23rd March. And to that, I just want to say it's going to be a short topic, even though I have a lot more to say, but it's my first stream, so I just want to get my thoughts and my tech right before I do much more. I'm going to prepare the next one much better, don't worry. It's probably going to be either tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, depending on my time, because afterwards I'm going to have a little less time to prepare. So I just want to get the next one even more right. Yeah. The Apple leak culture. The Apple leak culture has kind of gotten insane. For one, I think over the last 2 years, we have seen the number of leakers quadruple or something like that. At least the number of known and highly shared leakers. We have always had garbage people posting something on Twitter because their aunt have heard something from their 23rd cousin who works at Apple as a low-level engineer, but somehow he got approval to make the presentation for an Apple event. That's all has always been BS, and I think it will stay that way. So I always hate whenever people just post random stuff from Reddit from non-verified people. And the problem with John Prosser is that John Prosser he's been promising to shave off his eyebrows for quite some time, but he's also gotten some stuff wrong. Like, we might assume that because he still has his eyebrows, he has always been right, and he does have an 80% leak record of being correct. But let's be honest, he has gotten the last 3 Apple event dates wrong. And that's not the problem. And he has had great predictions about the iPhone SE and stuff like that. But my question is, when there is so much misinformation, when Apple is like poisoning the water of leakers to like Game of Thrones style, like root out who's actually leaking, maybe they've given somebody false information, which would be great because they can eliminate that leaker, or more likely they've just introduced some kind of fake leaker, because John Prosser has also had a good source that told them no, there isn't going to be a March event. So I think Apple is doing the right thing. The more they discredit leakers like John, not because it's John's fault, I think the more fun we're going to have during the events. Like, it's kind of sad because the M1 event was great because there were like hard numbers and stuff. Even though the Macs still look the same, the iPhone event, even though the iPhones have had changed designs, new processors, new cameras, like, we have had complete leaks, correct leaks like 2 days prior, but we have also had like 60 or 75% of the leaks like months before that. And for those who are following the Apple scene, not even just for the rumors, but for like analysis, software updates that are coming out, it's kind of nerve-wracking to get all your excitement destroyed because the leak culture, the spoiler culture has gotten kind of out of control. Like, what are you supposed to do as a fan? Like, because you want leaks for like products that are years away, like VR, AR, because you want to know how much has changed in the development process. You don't want to read that stuff in a biography 5 years from now. But you don't need to know whether the iPhone will get a millimeter thicker or thinner, because that's kind of Apple's point. Like, you don't need even to know the battery capacity most often. You don't need to know the RAM capacity. As long as your device works and it works well for the price you've paid, that's all you need to know ultimately. And to have this kind of leak culture that have promised us ProMotion screens, and ultimately we didn't get one. But we have ProMotion-ready screens inside the iPhone. But Apple just didn't enable it for performance, for battery life reasons. And it's Apple's prerogative to do so. And it's our prerogative as customers to decide whether we are still going to buy a device like that or not. But it's not our prerogative to have fake information or sort of right information with a lot of speculation, sort of spoiling that and then setting up false it's false expectations about those events, because even the stuff that is like, there were some crazy rumors about like MagSafe, in terms of like nobody knew what it's going to be. Like people were like magnetic port or anything. But when Apple showed off MagSafe during the iPhone 12 presentation, I was floored. I loved the new MagSafe on iPhone. And if that had been leaked, then my last great like surprise of that presentation would have been destroyed. And I'm so happy that not everything has leaked. And the tragedy is, if I want to do those kind of live streams now, like I'm not allowed to not read those rumors. I will have to cover them, and I want to cover them for you. But I will deliberately always call out when a leak is also unnecessary. Like I will give context to, like, yes, a 40% larger camera sensor is great, but let's also look at the 40% larger sensor in the iPhone 12 Pro Max versus the smaller sensor in the 12 Pro. The difference isn't that big. And for everybody that was in like the rumor space, oh my God, that sensor is going to destroy the cheaper phone. What are we going to do? Apple is cheapening out on the smaller devices. No, Apple is just saving up on space for the smaller ones, because there isn't much. Like if you had even bigger cameras, even more stuff on them, especially in the non-Pro series, like you would have less battery, or you would need to have a thicker device. It's your prerogative to not buy that stuff because it doesn't have something. But just ask yourself how much happier you would be to see a device's spec sheet if you would be seeing it for the first time once it's shown, and if you haven't had crazy leak telling you that it's going to be twice as good as what you see before you. Sorry for the small rant, but it's kind of been going on my nerve recently. Toilet break. Yeah, not myself. I see Subodh's taking a toilet break. It's all fine, man. It's our second topic. We are now streaming in for 35 minutes. So we've been now covering the second topic for around 10 minutes. And I think I'm gonna wrap up in around 15 minutes. So we are around between 45 minutes and 50 minutes. I think that's fair for the first live stream. Feel free, by the way, guys, to share like any kind of ideas for next streams. I will obviously, the live streams, will be able to see it inside the channel on YouTube. I will share more stuff of it on YouTube, on Twitter, wherever else. But I'm still thinking about it. So, topic number 3, and it's kind of a continuation of the March/April event question that we've had. I'm essentially gonna cover leaks here, but those aren't like one-time leaks. Those aren't widely discredited leaks, and a lot of it is just very, very logical. So that's why I'm gonna cover it. I'm not gonna cover crazy stuff like a probable AR glasses presentation, and even more so, I'm not even gonna talk that much about, for example, the details of AirTags. AirTags have been leaking for like 1.5 to 2 years. We have had some of their stuff show up in the Find My app. We have had code leak, or essentially code analyzed, from iOS 13 and 14. We already have reactions from competitors like Tile. Yeah, it's kind of, we have already had accessories made for it. We have patents. Granted, patents don't always mean much, but it's better than nothing. So and we have had John Prosser leaks in terms of renders for how they're gonna look based on what he actually saw. And given his track record with AirPods Max, I think it's very logical to assume they're gonna look sort of like this, like in this general shape and the general materials he talked about. but I would also say that they're definitely gonna look better, because if you think about his leak about the AirPods Max, I think the final product looked far more sleeker and far more Apple-y than his render. So AirTags are just going to be the small location trackers based on the U1 chip. Who knows, maybe Apple will give them a kind of U2 chip, though I doubt it. And on Bluetooth, but primarily U1, which is funny because Samsung launched a tracker, but it's purely based on Bluetooth, and they're promising an upgraded version that is also gonna have ultra wideband positioning tech inside. So it's just kind of hilarious how Samsung always preempts this stuff. Yes, apparently, according to most leakers and rumors, AirTags are ready and they're gonna be presented. And as we are slowly but surely transitioning out of CV19, I'm not gonna try to say it because apparently YouTube demonetizes people for that. And even though I'm not currently monetized, I'm also not very much looking forward to never getting monetized. So I'm just gonna adhere as much to YouTube's rules as possible. Because I'm also gonna because that's kind of what I'm known for. Like, I've talked about developers should having to adhere to Apple's guidelines because they're in their platform, and I'm on YouTube, so I'm gonna adhere to their rules. And I'm also gonna cover Epic, antitrust issues, and other App Store issues in subsequent streams. And this is what I'm gonna focus most about emotionally here, the 2021 iPad Pro, because the iPad Pro is my favorite Apple product. It's my number one Apple product. The second one is my Apple Watch. Even though I'm not even using the newest iPad Pro, I'm not even using the redesigned iPad Pro. I just think the combination of mobility, performance, great screen, incredible speakers and microphones for a device that size, the Apple Pencil support, the growing software updates, and support for more and more professional apps. Hi Saboto, welcome back. Do I think if Apple could use AirTags for tracking COVID or something connected with the pandemic? It's difficult to say. I think it's logical to assume that Apple could use AirTags for Find My related CV tracking of who met and who didn't, but I also don't think it's gonna matter because so very few people will gonna have AirTags, and so very few people will have those infection tracking apps installed. I just don't think it's gonna matter ultimately. That data has ultimately proven pretty useless. I think it has helped in like 5 to 10% of the cases because only 20% of the people have had those apps installed. And not everybody even checks those apps regularly. I don't think that big tech can do much more, to be honest. I wish they could have done more, but because the governments have also been so slow to react, they've been so slow to inform people. I will try not to speak too much about medicine and public health care in my streams, but it's been kind of disappointing, the general reaction by so many people. Like, people who should know better, who have waited too long to react, who have waited too long to make meaningful solutions, and who have failed to inform the public, which is their sworn duty. Meanwhile, we have had people like completely lie to us, no matter on what side of the political discussion you are or where you live. Like, basically every country has had demagogues and morons who would wanted to lie to you nonstop. I used the 2015 iPad Pro model because the 2015 iPad Pro was the big version with the A9X chip and 4 gigs of RAM. But then Apple introduced a 9.7-inch version that had like better cameras and like ever the slightly tweaked design, even though it's technically still the same. And it had True Tone, which I like, but I don't have on my iPad. But it's essentially the same device as the 2016 iPad Pro version, though it's technically faster because it has 4 gigs of RAM. Because the 2016 smaller iPad Pro only has 2, which, yes, is okay for iOS, especially in 2015, but kind of that was also the moment when Apple really started pushing multitasking on the iPad, and that's kind of when 2 gigs of RAM gets a little too little for me. Yeah, P3 was integrated with True Tone. It's very important to have both of those things coincide. Otherwise, you just get weird color issues sometimes. Not that it has happened, but like we have had devices like the iPhone 10, for example, has had 10 channels for color recognition and light recognition for True Tone, while the iPhone 8 that came out during the same time has had far less. So, and especially because then there were also issues like, does True Tone work better for OLED or for LCD? It's kind of essential to at least have the baseline of P3 for True Tone. Yeah, P3 will be on absolutely every Apple device from now. Now that we've even have it on like the MacBook Air, it's very important, and it kind of makes stuff easier for Apple going forward, because once in 10, 12 years, every device we have right now that has still an sRGB display, like it won't be supported anymore, and Apple will be able to just focus all of their color management on P3 and even beyond. I don't think that beyond is really necessary given how human eyes work, but I think it's just a nice touch. Okay, so let's start with the iPad Pro, which is definitely going to have a P3 color gamut display. And it's also going to have, which is going to be my favorite part of it, except for the design, which will be carried over from the 2018 version, the size, which will probably be most stuff focused on the 12.9-inch version, because a lot of leaks have kind of excluded the 11-inch version. The display, let's start about that. The display is going to be mini LED. For anybody of you who's not using OLED right now, the black part of my screen will be kind of bluish, darkish blue, like especially if you have an IPS panel, or maybe you have like an old plasma, then it's also going to be black. What mini LED is essentially very small LEDs, around 200 microns, probably even smaller for an iPad-sized device. And it's going to be thousands of light sources, like maybe like this, like a little square, and it's going to allow for much better contrast without a lot of the issues of OLED, like pulse width modulation and off-axis color shift, and especially burn-in. Like LCD does have burn-in, but on such a long time scale that for normal users it doesn't play a role at all. OLED, as it says, organic, even though it's kind of not organic, it has a shorter lifespan, and the more power you give it, the more brightness you force out of it, and the more static stuff, like for example this menu bar and this left-sided dog, like this can really force a burn-in issues, especially if you use a device for like 10 hours, and especially if you use it at maximum brightness. At some point, all of those images that you see in my menu bar would have had some kind of residual burn-in on an OLED, especially an older one or a cheaper one. And on bigger displays, it's kind of difficult to say, because LG OLED is better in terms of big screens than Samsung's, but we also have far less displays made by LG than Samsung, and Samsung kind of has a little bit better quality overall. So it's difficult to say what Apple even could use if they really wanted to make like big iPads, big Macs, and I'm not talking about the McDonald's kind. for OLED, so I'm very, very happy about mini LED. Higher contrast, higher brightness, none of the OLED issues, not as quite as expensive as OLED, and not quite as yield dependent because it's easier to produce, which is really, really important because Apple sells much more iPads than any other tablet vendor. And especially HDR, it's going to be a really nice touch if it has like a 600 nit display that can give you around 800 to 1000 nits of like small burst of high brightness HDR stuff. I think it's going to be perfect for basically everybody. And if you are watching stuff like 16:9 videos on like Netflix, then the bezels you would usually have around it, like the black bars on top, they would be black. And right now they are kind of distractingly darkest bluish, sometimes a little gray, which is kind of typical for IPS, which is the highest quality LED you can use. And mini LED will obviously, from a panel type technology, will still be dead, but because the backlight isn't universally turned on, it's going to be so much better. And this is what I'm most looking forward to. So I'm just going to have a small look at the chat. Do I think the rumors regarding Macs are true? Pointing on MagSafe, HDMI, more ports, box design is iPad. I think the box design is basically easy to confirm because the current MacBooks are already very boxy, and you just have to think about just think about it. It's just the curviest part of the MacBooks are like a little bit the top lid display stuff, and then below it where the little bumps are, so that it stands on the ground, right? Is that you don't have to scratch your Mac whenever you're putting it on the surface, and so that Macs with a fan can still get some air because they aren't like flush on the table. Like Macs are gonna be boxy. I think they're gonna get more ports, but I'm not sure how many of the promised ports they're gonna get. I would love HDMI 2.1 for like 4K 120 Hertz on modern TVs. And MagSafe, it would be weird, honestly, to have MagSafe back because we also now have a new version of MagSafe, but I wouldn't exclude it from being possible. I don't think I was never going to say that like Samsung like beats LG that much in OLED, especially if you look at the next gen of LG OLED TVs. They're also reaching higher brightness levels, and always the baseline performance, honestly, from all modern displays is quite awesome. Like I'm just happy that mini LED will help LCD catch up to a level where I think it's going to be acceptable, like almost in perpetuity. Like you could present somebody a mini LED screen in like 20 years and nobody will like scratch out their eyes because it's so disgusting. Like even my 1440p iMac, which like I'm somebody who's like very demanding of my tech. Like I always say that I can even see some pixels on 5K, but it's good enough for work. So yeah, we also have to be kind of realistic. I will give a small correction to you, Suboito. Like mini LED, best of OLED and LCD. I think it has almost the best of OLED. I think micro LED will be the final nail in the coffin of like best of OLED and the best of LED, and probably like better than either in most areas. So I think this is going to be definitely something to look forward to, and I really hope that Apple will experiment with micro LED with Apple Watch in the next like maybe 2 or 3 years. So we've talked about the screen. I think we're also going to get that screen on the next MacBook Pros, and that's why I also hope that those MacBooks are going to get ProMotion screens. I wouldn't bet on it though, because it's a little harder to maintain perfect color accuracy on higher refresh. Even though the iPad Pro is almost perfect when it comes to that, with like below 2.0 delta E, which is the empirical value for color deviation on displays, and everything below 2 is kind of like nigh perfect for the human eye. Like we aren't good at detecting more than that. And this is kind of what I'm even more excited about because my iPad is so old. Like, usually I would be more excited for the mini LED, and on a technological level, I am. But the processor, like, especially if it has like 8 gigs of RAM, especially if it allows Apple to port stuff like Xcode and Final Cut Pro, it's gonna be a dream. The A14X will be pretty much equivalent to the M1 processor. It's gonna have 4 high performance cores, so probably clocked at around 3 gigahertz, a little lower than the 3.2 gigahertz on the Mac. Like a 10% reduction on a processor in clock speed can usually result in like a 20% reduction in power draw. So it's going to be hugely important to maintain performance and reduce the heat that is produced by the processor. I think it's going to either have 7 or 8 GPU cores. I think 7 is probably likely, given that the iPad Air is already faster than the current gen iPad Pro, even in GPU tasks. It only loses in multi-core CPU tasks and utterly demolishes it in single-core CPU tasks. So if you add 3 GPU cores on top of the iPad Air's 4, then you'll kind of get like 75% more performance. And when you consider how much power draw the device has to manage, like 8 cores just doesn't make sense, especially if it's the same silicon die as the M1. I think it will make a lot of sense to put like the 7-core GPU version inside the iPad Pro and like the base level M1, and then we can basically scale the entire lineup perfectly to have like 8-core GPU versions and like the MacBook Pro, the higher end MacBook Air configuration, and especially the Mac Mini that obviously can sustain much more performance and much more power draw. And 5G or 5G, or as Tim Cook would say, 5G, which is going to be the next level of connectivity for all of us. And 5G in my area promises speeds of around 300 Mbits, which is 3 times slower than what should be the theoretical maximum speed of LTE Advanced, which should be around 1 gigabit per second, if you remember a tech that was launched 8 years ago, what they were promising. But I will still probably get the 5G version because 5G is very non-congested in my area, and it's basically going to be a dream to have it at full speed. And it doesn't cost me extra in my contract over 4G, and I always get the cellular connectivity, which what would suck if Apple would make like a $150 upgrade for 4G and then like a $250 for 5G, because $250 just for the cellular version as an upgrade is kind of a lot. At that point, I might just go for the Wi-Fi version, to be quite honest. And just use my iPhone as a hotspot. But I'm still excited for upgraded connectivity because my iPad is quite old at 5 years of age, and it just needs like more bands. It just, even though it's quite good, but it just loses its connectivity more often than I would like it to be. 7 cores for the 11-inch and 8 cores for the 12.9-inch. I think it would be a great compromise, and I honestly think that this is what Apple would do if the yields are all right, but I don't think we know how good the yields are right now on 5 nanometer. They're supposed to be very good, and Apple basically doesn't have to disable anything on their other chips. So if the yields are good, I actually would love to see like a slightly lower clocked 8-core version on every processor, like even on the 11-inch version. Then Apple could just, because if you make the architecture a little wider but clock it a little lower, it's much better for efficiency than a smaller architecture that is just insanely highly clocked, which is great if you have something like a PS5 because you have the thermal headroom and you already have quite the wide design, but the iPad is so small in terms of the chip that there are no latency penalties from going from a 7-core to an 8-core. So yeah, I would love it, Ibrahim. And yeah, Actually, I don't think there will be much to complain about this iPad, because given Apple, I also think that like they will get obviously like the new upgraded microphones. I also wouldn't be surprised if they also get like new speakers, and obviously they're gonna get better cameras. Like, I love what Apple is doing with the iPad, and there are also rumors about like a slightly upgraded Apple Pencil, and even a new Magic Keyboard, which is Apple's famously expensive $300 to $350 keyboard accessory for the iPad. But given that I might keep the iPad for like another 5 years, maybe even longer, with upgraded tech, I would get it. And this is kind of my dilemma, and I will discuss it in other streams too, because actually I'm having quite a lot of fun. Usually I just have to like torture my friends with my Apple discussions. But now I can have some kind of outlet, which is awesome. And I will try to have the other streams work better for you, like the people who are following me on Twitter and stuff. But like, I've timed this basically like an US centered stream, but I think I would do the next one like around 2 hours earlier than I've done this one. Feel free to type in the chat where you think that this is sort of more agreeable for you as a timeline, because I know a lot of you have to go to work. So yeah, I think 2 hours earlier would be great, because essentially we would be finishing the stream off where we have started it today. I think that's a great compromise for everybody here. So, and yeah, my last point about this is the competition in my head between the iPad Pro and the upcoming MacBook Pro, because I want a new MacBook. Like, I love emulators, I love some of the freedom, and if I'm gonna be streaming more regularly, then I think it's gonna be quite fun to have a device that doesn't punish me whenever I try doing something like that, like the iPad would. But I'm also just so excited for a fresh and streamlined device like this. So I will hope that you will also give me tips on what you think will suit me better in other streams. Hopefully we'll be more by that point than 2 people. But believe me, the 2 people that are in, I absolutely adore you. Feel free to like it. We already have 1 like. We might get a second one if you're listening in, if you actually like it. But because YouTube for some reason loves the likes, and it's absolutely needed. So yeah, this is basically me kind of finishing here, because we have talked about some of the most recent stuff about Intel versus Apple. We have talked about, which is most important, I think, for all of us, like Apple events with new hardware, with new software. And this is kind of like it's kind of the perfect image. We have 3 likes. Like, what the I'm trying not to swear. Then it's just not updated on my iPhone. I'll try to start it off, and yeah, we have more likes than I've seen it. Thanks, guys. So yeah, I just would love to thank you for the opportunity. I know that I'm speaking a little fast, and I'll try to change that. I'm just very nervous and very excited for the opportunity to do so. Like, fundamentally, I don't think that nobody in the world deserves a microphone. Like, nobody just deserves to be heard, to have influence on other people, but I think we all deserve the chance to have that. Fundamentally, like, if we all like do our best, inform ourselves the best, and try to inform the others the best, then I think we can all grow. If we can listen to more voices, I think it will be great for the people who are listening and for those who are obviously providing the content, and not just monetary. But I think whenever you have the obligation that other people are listening to you, and you have the obligation to actually do something out of it, I think people should grow with that. Not everybody will, and some will greatly misuse the power to do so. And I know this is so ridiculous about the stream of like Apple Tech with like 2 to 3 people watching, but I'm just so grateful for the opportunity. And I really hope you tune in the next time. I will try to do it at a better time slot. And I really hope you can now go to bed. Feel free to like it once it's online. Feel free to comment it once it's like fully finished, because obviously the live chat doesn't translate quite well to YouTube's algorithms. Feel free to give me feedback in the comments. Feel free to give me feedback on Twitter. And I'll see you guys next time. I love you so much for the opportunity to do so here. Goodbye and auf Wiedersehen.